Hi, Stuart. It's good to see you. I've been away.
Yes, good to have you back.
Just returned. I was in Spain. I went to Mallorca, Barcelona. It was a wonderful trip. You know, when I was in Barcelona, which is not a big city like New York, it's a little smaller, a little more intimate. But I did see a few homeless people, but not many. I didn't smell marijuana all over the place. I didn't see piles of crap on the ground. I didn't see people shooting up drugs on the street. And, you know,
you felt lost. Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't know. I wonder how it is that these kind of dysfunctional countries in Europe, which many of them are with high unemployment and all these problems, how is it that their cities are in way better condition than one of the best and biggest and supposedly greatest city in America? You know, it's probably because who's running America? And one of the things I experienced on this trip was, you know, it was very relaxing. It was a pretty country, beautiful beaches, a lot of culture. But one of the things we have now had to become used to as Americans is when we travel, no matter where you go, you have to pretty much count on the fact that your flight's either going to be delayed, canceled, they're going to lose your bags or whatever. And this has been a problem that has percolated ever since the disastrous COVID policies that shut down our transportation system, mandated vaccines on airport employees, and left the system in tatters. So ever since they tried to reopen air transportation, there's been a snafu of problems. And one of the reasons there are problems is the lack of staffing, because a lot of people didn't come back after being let out of work. They found other things to do. Also, a lot of people were not going to take a fake vaccine mandated by the fraud, quack, loser, Dr. Fauci. And, you know, another thing about it is the Biden administration took over towards the tail end of COVID, and they were supposed to get things up and running. And who does Joe, low IQ, bottom of the class from his undistinguished law school, pick to run the transportation department? Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Now, who is this guy? Okay, he was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. He had the hubris to run for president of the United States with that kind of sterling reputation. I don't know what kind of foreign policy experience he had pushing cows across the road in South Bend, Indiana, but this is who he picks to run the transportation department. Mayor Pete took the job at the height of a global crisis. He was an essential worker. All those healthcare workers, they showed up in hospitals to take care of people during this period. But someone who takes a high-level, 24/7 cabinet job decides to have 2 children via a surrogate with his husband and took 3 months paternity leave. Can you even imagine if he ran for president and won the presidency? Was he going to take paternity leave? I mean, seriously, this guy is a clown, a complete clown. He, as Secretary of Transportation, has overseen one of the worst transportation disasters. We have had supply chain crises. He's inept. He could not handle it. But I will tell you, one of the funniest things I've heard out of this complete babbling moron, okay, is that he was going to make our highways less racist. So what does that mean, Stuart? Was he going to, instead of using blacktop, use white top? I mean, I've never heard of anything, how this man got this job. It is an insult that someone takes a high-level cabinet position. Was he breastfeeding these kids? Did he have to recover from the C-section? He had babies through a surrogate. If you want to do that, fine. You want to be a family man. Don't take a cabinet job. A spoiled, entitled embodiment of that horrible generation. This man should never be anywhere near a position of authority making such an irresponsible decision. And the disastrous results have been what goes on at our airports anytime someone has to travel. And guess what? He was one of the finalists for Kamala's vice presidential candidate. Can you imagine this complete moron, no experience whatsoever? The only thing he has going for him is that he's married to Chastain and had 2 babies through a surrogate and drives a Prius. He's disgusting. This is my pet peeve for the day, Stuart, is Mayor Pete. He's
you have a number of them. Let me just tell you got a bunch.
I have hated him from the beginning. He's a complete fraud. And a president, imagine, I can't even, but, he's not the only loser out there. He does give off that, shucks, Gomer Pyle kind of personality. But he is certainly not presidential temper. He can't even run the transportation department, as indicated by the innumerable problems we have witnessed at airports, shipping, etc. You go down the list. There's nothing he can't do wrong, except, of course, there's one person worse than him, which is the moron who appointed him, who is now basically been set off to pasture by Nancy Pelosi. But anyway, so Stuart, is there anything that's kind of getting your goat today?
Well, I've got a couple of things on my mind, but one of them is this lady. She's the DA in Monroe County in New York. That's the county which includes Rochester. This is a true story. I'm not making stuff up here. She's driving home from somewhere, and she sees in her rearview mirror lights on and sirens ringing from a cop behind her. She was doing 55 and a 35. She refuses to stop for the cop and goes all the way home. And oh, by the way, she made a call on the way home while on the road, while driving, to the chief of police. She understood probably that she was going to be stopped for speeding and wanted to let the chief of police know what one of his men was doing to such an important person as she. She gets into the garage and he says, "You've been doing 55 and a 35. And she says, "No. And anyway, look, I'll investigate the matter." She says, "I'll investigate the matter. And it's going to come to nothing." And then she says, he insists on her. He objects. She starts to curse him. And he insists. He says to her, "Look, all I'm doing is my job. Why are you yelling at me?" She starts to leave into the house and go from the garage into the house. He says, "You can't do that. You need to come back here." Finally, she relents and she says, "Oh, I'll sign a ticket." So she signs a ticket. And then she tried to get the chief of police back on the phone so the chief could speak to his subordinate. Now, what do you see in all this? I mean, I see a DA who was abusing her authority, who was refusing to stop on a lawful order of a policeman, someone who is cursing at abusing an official in another way. And then what happens? And you might say, listener, how do I know all this? Did I get it from one story in a newspaper? Was it a biased story? And here's the kicker. This is all on video. The cop cam picked up everything I said and more. You can all you have to do is say Sandra Doorley. Sandra, Door, and you'll see what I said. Now, once that video went viral, well, the world changed for Sandra. There are now investigations in 3 or 4 different commissions and parts of state government, including the Attorney General of New York State and a bar association and the DA Society of whatever. She's likely to come up on criminal charges of a variety of types, using an official position to abuse someone, refusing to obey a lawful order, and several others. And when you see it, you're going to say, damn it, she deserves anything she gets, which would eventually involve, I assume, some criminal prosecution and eventually bar association. I would think there's a good chance at her being chucked out of the legal society. But what is also important here is the hero of the piece, in my view, as I see it. Here's a guy, Cameron Crisafulli is his name, who stood up under enormous duress. He stood up against someone who was really threatening his career, threatening his income. Don't know how much of a family he had or didn't have. But he stood up in the face of that over what I imagine was 5 to 10 minutes. And I wonder, how many of us step up when given a chance to do the right thing, but at great potential cost to ourselves, whether it's a job, whether it's money. How many of us stand up? And so I think this guy was a marvel, and I hope he ends up getting praise and reward in different ways. Cameron Crisafulli, take a look at it, video. I think you'll be touched. I think your stomach will turn when you hear and watch what this woman did. What do you think of all that, David? Anything?
You know, I did hear about the story, and it's just another example of the arrogance of power. Even though she didn't really have that much power, she was the DA of Monroe County. What exactly?
A lot of power over a lot of lives.
Yeah, I guess. But it's typical of people in positions of power. They let it get to their head if they're not level-headed and reasonable people, which most of them aren't. And she is just another example of why people hate politicians and why they hate most of our leadership, because there's very few people like Christopher who are going to stand up and do the right thing.
Cameron Crisafulli.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Cameron. Thank you. Yeah. You know, there aren't people like that. And this woman certainly is. And, you know, she doesn't say much for female prosecutors, I can tell you that, or prosecutors in general, including our vice president. Okay, I have been listening to so much fanfare about her and how wonderful she is. It's like her whole past didn't exist before, which was a disastrous presidential run, running to the left of Bernie Sanders, being a joke as a vice president, giggling anytime someone asks her a question. And now she's given the left a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm. They sound like they found a whole new life. Well, let me tell you something, Stuart. Kamala is no Barack Obama. I mean, you can say what you want about Obama and his flaws, but he was an inspirational speaker. He was intelligent. He wrote books. He was not some guy who slept with Willie Brown to get ahead in life the way she did. And she was a mediocre politician who got herself to be vice president. And this is where we are not allowed to say she was a DEI candidate, but she was. Biden, when he ran for president, the stupid moron that he is, went and announced that he was only going to consider a vice president who was female. And I guess he decided to add on the fact that she was mixed race to the equation. So no males could apply for the job of vice president, black or white. He intentionally selected and limited his universe to women. And then he went on to one of the least qualified Democrat women out there who had a terrible record in the Senate and as a prosecutor. And her poor judgment has once again come to the surface because she has recently announced her vice president. And at first I was kind of taken aback because I didn't know who this guy was, and I don't think most people do. But when you find out what he's all about, you should run for the hills. First of all, Stuart, I don't know how you feel about this, but I do not feel the vice president of the United States should look like a walrus. Because this guy looks like a walrus. Look at him. He's this big, lumbering, moron-looking guy. He looks like a walrus. And I feel that...
I don't know. I don't think that's damning. I do.
Well, here's something that might be a little more damning about Mr. Walz, okay? First of all, I love hearing about how he came to the surface because we referred to Trump and Vance as creepy and weird and how funny that is. You know, okay, we all know Donald Trump is very weird. No joke. But I think this guy is a little weird. It was a weird choice. You had a very strong Democrat candidates you could have chosen, Mark Kelly being one of them, the guy from Pennsylvania, Shapiro. Both were strong. You may not like them. You may not agree with what they say, but they had very good records as governors. This guy's right.
I would have thought, just on the subject of Shapiro, that he raised an issue stability because of his positive stance on Israel. And I think that would have become a distraction, or at least I think that was probably on their minds.
Well, I think you're right about that Shapiro was knocked out because he's Jewish, and a good portion of the Democrat Party is anti-Semitic.
There's actually 2 points there.
Yeah.
One is, I do think his stance on Israel, no matter what his religion, would have become a distraction because of what we've got going on in this country. The second is, and I think it's important, he is Jewish, and we haven't had a Jewish president, and that is still an issue. When Kennedy came in, of course, Catholicism was a big issue. I don't think that issue with respect to Jews is gone. It hasn't become part of...
Well, it certainly hasn't. Look at the words of Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and that whole contingent. They are not just protesting Benjamin Netanyahu. They are involved and active in harassing and bullying Jewish Americans who really have nothing to do with what's going on in Israel and the Netanyahu regime. And so Kamala is bending to those people. And if she had any integrity, which she doesn't, she wouldn't have picked this guy, because when he was governor, okay, Stuart, let's go through some of his many highlights as a governor. All right, as a congressman, he was in the Congress, and they're talking about how he's a football coach, a teacher, blah, blah, blah. He's a Midwest mainstream Democrat, blah, blah, blah. And he criticized J.D. Vance because he went to Yale, and he doesn't have an Ivy League background. Well, first of all, Stuart, when I'm thinking of people for the highest offices of the land, I don't want a football coach. I want someone who went to Yale. I want someone who's intelligent. I don't want some guy who's involved in a barbaric ritual called football where people get injured and brain injuries.
Oh, please. It's part of the American scene.
It should go away. It should be banned. Who comes out of the football? Drug addicts, dog killers, murderers. I don't think football is a positive thing in America. I am against it. It's violent and it's caused serious damage to people. There's a long list of thugs who go into football, but I'm getting a little carried away. The point I'm trying to make is a football coach is not the person I want negotiating with Putin, okay? I want someone who's got some brains and intellect, not some guy who went to some It's
not one or the other. It's not brains or football coach. I mean, the man could have brains, and whether or not he was a football coach.
Well, let's look at his record and determine whether he had brains. When the city of Minneapolis, was being burnt to the ground and looted and rioted, he refused to call the National Guard in for help. He was criticized by the own Democrat mayor. He waited, I think, a long amount of hours and allowed all this property damage before calling in the National Guards. Then when he finally called them in, he called it an inadequate number to cool what had happened. It was a disaster. There was massive amounts of COVID fraud in Minneapolis or in Minnesota under his rule. And as a governor, he has had one of the most progressive, far-left records out there. And that is unacceptable. That is not a mainstream Democrat. He is Cory Bush with a smile. And
why is he so popular there?
With who, though?
The population is...
they don't know him yet, Stu. And I think he does give off...
They elected him a couple of times, haven't they?
Yeah, but in Minnesota. Well, I mean, Minnesota is one of the few states that voted for Walter Mondale when he was slaughtered by the great Ronald Reagan. Minnesota is a very liberal state. It is not, it is not a...
balanced.
Yeah, it's not like, Pennsylvania, which is a little more mixed. And another thing that our Governor Walz, this very liberal governor, did, he made it so that you could get tampons, funded this in both the men's room and the ladies' room in schools, so that if
Where did you pick this up?
It's all over the place. It's true. And if you are, this was in high schools, and if you are in schools, and if you are a female who identifies as a male, you can use the bathroom to go get a tampon, the men's room. And not only that, this is something I find preposterous. Just we are allowing young children to get, gender, quote unquote, affirming surgery. If someone has gender dysphoria, that's an issue that needs to be addressed, but you do not do surgery on children. They are not even old enough to know what they're doing.
True.
Most brains are not fully developed till 27. This is another liberal canard. This is not an affirmation of who you are and what you are. You don't even know what you are when you're a kid. So if you're going to make that decision, you should be an adult. And the fact that he was involved in permitting this just goes to show that he is not acceptable as a candidate. And, let's just get back to this whole, folksy, weird, he's such a great guy, blah, blah, blah. You know what? I don't think it's appropriate. I mean, I have issues with J.D. Vance, the Trump pick. He's an opportunist, obviously. He bashed Trump repeatedly, criticized him, made him, told him, even compared him to Hitler. Now all of a sudden he's kissing his ass, right? This guy is an opportunist. But at the same time, his background, that he brought himself up from a station in life that was very,
pretty.
Yeah, he was a nobody. He got himself to Yale Law School. That's a plus, not a minus to me.
Sure.
And it's a lot better than being a football coach who got caught drunk driving when he was younger and had to give up drinking. Because that's another thing we've heard about our little Walz, which is that when he was only 31 when this happened. So we can't, it's 31, but he was driving 95 in a 55. And then he tried to lie to the cops who were chasing him that he didn't hear the sirens. I mean, it almost sounds like your prosecutor. Normally I would let that go because he was young and he made a mistake. But when George W. Bush ran for president, they made a big deal of the fact that he had a drunk driving incident back in Kennebunkport when he was on with John Newcomb, the tennis player, or whatever. So if liberals want to make an issue of drunk driving, they better be careful because their drunk drivers are murderous. Because I forgot to mention that disgusting pig, Ted Kennedy, who murdered his mistress in Chappaquiddick, left her there to drown, and then went back to the hotel, staggering drunk, tried to get one of his aides to take the blame, and never called the police. That girl could have been saved. And he got away with murder because he used his family connections to allow himself, in Massachusetts, which worships the Kennedy. But I don't want to, but talk about drunk drivers. So,
well, I'll just say one thing. They couldn't have saved her, but he certainly didn't do the right thing and try and bring back help. When that thing went in the water, she was dead meat. He could have tried himself somehow, but going and getting other help wouldn't have worked. But he showed no interest in doing the right thing at the time.
Well, he is no hero, and he was never a lion of the Senate. He was a guy who got thrown out of Harvard for cheating on a Spanish exam. And how he got caught, he had someone go take the exam from him. And while the exam was ongoing, he was in a bar drinking, and the professor caught him. This is a Democrat icon, Ted Kennedy, another fraud. But I'm getting a little off base.
That's okay.
I'm getting a little off base because we don't need to talk about the Kennedys. They're disgusting people. But, I do think this Walz character is not a good candidate. It was a bad choice, and it's a reflection of Kamala's poor judgment. And yes, I agree with David Axelrod. There's a lot of irrational exuberance about her candidacy, and I'm not so sure, Stuart, it is going to fly.
I don't know. I just know that the polls have showed success
somewhat successfully, yeah.
So far. We'll see how he plays out on the trail.
Well, I guess when you have a former president of the United States appearing before black journalists and claiming when they question him about all his racially inflammatory language, he claims that he was the best president for blacks since Abraham Lincoln. That's just an abomination. I mean, Abraham Lincoln was one of the greatest presidents. He gave the Gettysburg Address that lasted like 15 minutes. It was one of the most historic speeches, entire justification for the Civil War and for our Union. Donald Trump gave a 90-minute convention speech that was a bunch of garbage and nonsense, where he tried to play off the fact that he got grazed in the ear. And then he went on to question whether Kamala was actually black, as he said. What is it with this thing and him attacking people and their racial identity? He's a big, fat, orange pig. And
he has an innate, I don't want to say inherent, but he has an innate desire to scream, yell, abuse, attack, and to get what he wants. And he's relentless. And until he feels that it's not the right process, that it's not the right approach, it'll continue. And I don't really think he will ever be able to feel that it's wrong. I think that's his nature, and he can't overcome that. And there need be no facts involved in his assertions, that's for sure.
Well, that's for sure. I don't think he doesn't know anything about facts. All he knows about is cheeseburgers and his Russian prostitute wife, or whatever the hell she is. But at the end of the day, even though I find Kamala and Walz loathsome people, I have to say, if they put an end to MAGA, I'd be happy. But why don't we talk about...
I want to interrupt and say, you remind me of another story.
Go ahead.
And it's about Lincoln. That's why you reminded me of it. When Lincoln was running for the presidency, still pretty much unknown, we didn't have the web and we didn't have television and the like. he received a letter from a girl just outside of Buffalo. I've forgotten the name of the town, and I've forgotten her name. She was a young teenager. And at this time, Lincoln was without a beard. And she wrote him a note saying, you know, Mr. Lincoln, I think in order to win, you really do need to have a beard. I've talked with men in my family, and people have beards, and that's customary. So I recommend you have a beard. He wrote a note to her. And I've seen the notes in this wonderful book, a pictorial review of Lincoln and his tenure. And he gets the note, and he writes back a handwritten note to her, and it says, I appreciate your trying to help me, and I'll be giving that some thought. First of all, how many people would write such a handwritten note? I know presidencies are busy places, but a handwritten note to a young girl. Then he starts on his way to Washington. He's got to take a train all the way to Albany and then south, and he stops in Buffalo, and he goes to visit her. And he says hello, and he visits with her. I just think that's sweet. And, oh, by the way, the beard came on.
Well, isn't he one of the few presidents who had a beard? Apparently most of them are clean-shaven. But, I mean, Abraham Lincoln was a significant president, and I realize AOC and her crowd may not like him. They'll find something racist about him. But,
well, he had a slave, so you can condemn anyone of the period.
Right.
He had one, and who was treated with respect.
But at the end of the day, he fought the Civil War. He won the Civil War. He put down the Democrat Party pro-slavery insurrectionists. He was the Emancipation Proclamation was Abraham Lincoln. He was an eloquent statesman, a great leader. He won the presidency by the Electoral College vote also. So we hear all these liberals want to get rid of the Electoral College. Well, without the Electoral College, we would not have had Abraham Lincoln. So before they think about altering our Constitution, because they're frustrated that Big Mama Clinton lost to Trump by an Electoral College defeat, they should think better than nominating America's stepford wife, who defended her rapist husband against all the sexual assaults he committed. And most people didn't take her seriously as a feminist because any real feminist wouldn't have put up with Bill Clinton, stayed married to him, and basically attacked the women he assaulted. But that's what Hillary Clinton did, and that's just the tip of the iceberg when it gets to that dreadful, horrible, obnoxious, moron, terrible president, terrible first lady, terrible senator.
Lincoln spoke at Cooper Union. Did you know that?
Yes, I do know that. And that was another one of his great speeches.
Yes, and it's a marvelous sword.
Well, Stuart, you just want to look on the bright side. You're not taking the bait when I talk about Big Mama Clinton.
No, I have a variety of feelings about her, but they're not as strong as yours.
Well, I'm overplaying it for effect. I mean, she's a loser. She's always been a loser. She is ineffective. I mean, when I saw Trump rip her to shreds in the debates, I very much enjoyed it because he really did. And the fact that a bumbling moron like him could make her look bad is kind of funny. That's how bad she is. You know, I hate to say this, Stuart, but I have been rambling on and on thanks to Mayor Pete Buttigieg getting me going. But I think we're kind of running out of time here. I hope that doesn't piss you off and make you want to cut my head off, because I know that you always have stuff to say.
But if time is up, time is up.
All right. Well, we will reconvene, and the next time I will probably be a little calmer because I've gotten over the trauma of Delta Airlines and their delays, cancellations, and lack of customer service. And yes, that was intentional to trash them for what a ridiculous operation that is. Have a good day.
So long.